The night my son-in-law left a stack of his shirts outside my bedroom door, I didn't say a word. I picked them up, set them on the hallway table, and went back to bed. I lay there in the dark for a long time, staring at the ceiling of that small room, listening to the house settle around me. That was 3 months into living with my daughter and her husband in Oakville. I keep going back to that moment, the shirts, the hallway, the ceiling, because I think that was the night I understood what I had become. My wife, June, passed away in the spring, pancreatic cancer. We had 14 months from diagnosis to the end, which sounds like enough time to prepare, and it isn't. You think it will be. You make plans, you have conversations, you hold hands in hospital rooms and say all the things you're supposed to say. And then she's gone anyway, and the house you've lived in for 31 years is somehow both too big and too suffocating to breathe in. I had retired 2 years earlier from a 28-year career teaching high school history in Hamilton. We'd been planning to travel, the Maritimes first, then maybe Portugal. June had a notebook with restaurant names written in it, little paper cutouts of hotels taped to the pages. After she died, I found the notebook in her nightstand. I couldn't open it past the first page. My daughter Nadia called me every few days that first month. She was worried, which I understood. I was worried about myself too. I'd lost about 12 pounds without trying. I was sleeping at odd hours. I'd forget to eat lunch and not notice until 5 in the afternoon. "Dad," she said one evening in late June, "we want you to come stay with us." Nadia and her husband, Scott, lived about 40 minutes away in a newer subdivision, one of those neighborhoods where all the houses look slightly different but somehow exactly the same. They had a 4-bedroom place, a finished basement, 2 dogs, and a son named Theo, who had just turned 3. Scott worked in commercial real estate. Nadia had gone back to part-time work as a dental hygienist after Theo was born. I said I appreciated the offer, but I was fine. She called again 3 days later, and again the week after that. "Just for a little while," she said. "Just until you find your footing, we have the room. Theo would love having you there. You can help out a bit, keep yourself busy. Help out a bit, keep myself busy." I told myself it made sense. The logical part of my brain lined it up. I was alone, she had space, I wasn't sleeping or eating properly, and Theo. I did love that little boy. I thought about the summer June and I had spent with him the year before, building things out of cardboard boxes in the backyard. I thought maybe a change of environment would help me breathe again. I also thought about the money, if I'm honest. My pension was solid, and June and I had savings, but the housing market in Hamilton had shifted enough that selling my house would set me up well. Nadia had mentioned, once casually, that it might make sense to get out from under the mortgage and the upkeep of a 5-bedroom house I was living in alone. I sold the house in August, got a good price, signed the papers and packed what I could fit into the spare bedroom at Nadia and Scott's place, and put the rest in storage. I told myself it was temporary, 3 months, maybe 4, just until I figured out the next chapter. The room was fine. It faced the backyard, so in the morning I could see the maple tree June would have loved. There was a small desk by the window, and I set up my books there and told myself I'd finally have time to read all the things I'd been meaning to read. The first week was good. I cooked dinner twice, and Nadia seemed genuinely touched. I helped with Theo in the morning so she could sleep a little later, and I liked that. I liked the weight of him toddling over to me with a book in his hands, demanding the same story 3 times in a row. Scott was polite, quiet in the way some men are quiet, not shy, just economical. He worked long hours and came home distracted, eating dinner with his phone face up beside his plate. He was pleasant enough. We talked hockey occasionally. He had season tickets to the Leafs, which he mentioned more than once. By week 3, something had shifted without anyone saying it out loud. Nadia started leaving notes on the kitchen counter. Little reminders, what time Theo needed to be fed, what he could and couldn't eat, which days he had swimming lessons. I assumed at first they were for Scott. Then I noticed Scott never looked at them. I started taking Theo to swimming on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I started doing school pickups. Theo had started a half-day program at a nearby Montessori. I was making dinner 4 nights a week. I was doing the grocery runs because I was home anyway and it just made sense. I didn't mind any of it. That's the part that's hardest to explain. I genuinely didn't mind. I missed June every single day, and being useful, being needed, softened the edges of that grief just enough to make it survivable. I told myself I was contributing. I told myself this was what family did. What I didn't notice, or didn't want to notice, was that it had stopped being a favor and become an expectation. The first time I understood that was a Tuesday afternoon in September. I had planned to drive to Burlington to visit an old friend of mine, a former colleague named Peter, who I hadn't seen since the funeral. I told Nadia at breakfast that I'd be out for the afternoon. She looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What about Theo's pickup?" she said. "Scott's working from home today," I said. "He's got back-to-back calls until 5. There was a pause. She didn't say anything else. She just looked at me. I drove Theo to his pickup. I called Peter on the way home and told him I'd have to reschedule. He said that was fine. He said it in the way people say things are fine when they're a little worried about you. October was when I started noticing the laundry. Scott had a habit of leaving his dress shirts draped over the chair in the upstairs hallway. The chair that had no other purpose, as far as I could tell, except to hold Scott's shirts. I assumed it was a temporary pile. Then one morning, on my way to the kitchen, I noticed the pile had moved. It was outside my door, not beside the chair. Outside my door. I stood there for a moment looking at it. Then I picked it up, took it downstairs, and put it on the laundry room counter. I did his shirts along with my own things, and left them folded on the hallway chair. He didn't mention it. Neither did Nadia. The week after that, the pile appeared outside my door again. I thought, at the time, that I was being a good father, that I was helping, that this was what it looked like to be part of a family's daily life, not just a guest in it. I look back now and I understand that I was making myself small, because small felt easier than the alternative. And I had confused being needed with being loved, and that confusion was costing me something I couldn't name yet. The dinner party was in November. Nadia and Scott had people over. Scott's colleagues, mostly, plus a few of their friends from the neighborhood. 8 people in total. Nadia spent the better part of the week planning it, and somewhere in the middle of that planning, she asked if I could handle the food. I said of course. I like cooking. I'd been making most of their meals anyway. I spent all of Saturday in the kitchen. I made a brisket, low and slow the way June taught me, brown sugar and Dijon and apple cider vinegar. I made roasted root vegetables and a wild rice dish and a lemon tart from a recipe I'd been holding on to for years. I was in that kitchen for 6 hours. I didn't sit down. At 5:30, Nadia came in to check on things. She looked pleased. She said everything smelled incredible. At 6, I went upstairs to change. When I came back down, the guests were arriving. I came around the corner into the living room, and Nadia was at the door, hugging someone, laughing. Scott was pouring drinks. Theo was already in bed. Nadia looked up and saw me. "Oh, Dad," she said. "Actually, could you just keep an eye on things in the kitchen? The brisket needs someone nearby in case anything." She trailed off because someone had said something to her, and she was already turning away. I went back to the kitchen. I stood at the counter for a while. I could hear them in the other room, laughing, the sound of glasses, someone telling a story that got a big reaction. I heard Scott say something and everyone laughed again. At some point, one of Scott's colleagues came through to get more wine from the fridge. He stopped when he saw me. "Hey," he said, "did you make all this?" "I did," I said. He looked genuinely impressed. He said the brisket was unbelievable. He asked if I was a chef. I told him I was a retired high school teacher. He laughed, a little awkwardly, and went back to the other room. I waited until the brisket was carved and the plates were being passed, and then I went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the maple tree in the backyard, which was bare by then, November having done its work. I thought about Peter, who had called again last week and said we really needed to make a plan to get together. I thought about my friend Alan, who I'd taught with for 15 years, and who had been asking me for months to come visit him in Kelowna. I thought about June's notebook with the restaurant names in it. I thought about the shirts outside my door. I didn't tell Nadia how I was feeling. I know that's the part people will find frustrating, and honestly, they're not wrong. I had spent my career teaching teenagers to speak up, to be direct, to name what was happening. And here I was, folding my son-in-law's laundry in silence. But here's what I've come to understand. I did say things, not in the big dramatic way people imagine. No confrontation, no kitchen table ultimatum. But I said things in all the small ways you try to say things when you're still hoping someone will notice without being told. I canceled the trip to see Peter and waited to see if Nadia would ask why I hadn't rescheduled it. She didn't. I stopped making dinner on Fridays to see if anyone would step in. Scott ordered pizza. Nadia thanked me for the break and didn't seem to notice it was still me keeping track of Theo's schedule, Theo's snacks, Theo's reading books. The month before I left, I did the math. Not in a resentful way, I want to be clear about that. I just needed to understand what was actually happening. I had become, by any reasonable accounting, a live-in nanny and household manager. Childcare alone, at the going rate in Ontario, runs between $18 and $25 an hour. I was putting in somewhere between 40 and 50 hours a week, between Theo's care, cooking, shopping, and the housekeeping that had somehow also become mine. I wasn't angry doing the math, I was just finally willing to see it clearly. I called Alan in Kelowna on a Thursday evening. He answered on the second ring. "You name the date," he said. "My guest room has been ready since June." I started slowly, because I wanted to be methodical about it. I didn't want to leave in a rush. I didn't want to leave angry. I wanted to leave in a way I could feel good about, which is harder than it sounds when you're still a few months out from the worst loss of your life, and you're living in someone else's house in a room that faces a maple tree. I found an apartment in Burlington, not Kelowna. I decided Kelowna was a visit, not a landing. Burlington felt right, close enough that I could still see Theo. Far enough that the space between us would have to be chosen rather than just assumed. It was a one-bedroom on the 6th floor of a building near the lake. Good light. A small balcony. Affordable on my pension. And with what I'd cleared from the house sale, I could furnish it properly, set it up the way I wanted, without rushing. I put down the deposit on a Wednesday. I told Nadia on a Friday morning over coffee. Theo was at his Montessori program. Scott was already at work. She stared at me. "You found an apartment," she said. "I signed the lease Wednesday," I said. "I move at the end of the month." She set her mug down. She looked hurt, which surprised me, and then I realized it shouldn't have. "I thought you were happy here," she said. I looked at her for a moment. I thought about the shirts. I thought about the dinner party. I thought about standing at that kitchen counter, listening to the party in the other room. "I think," I said carefully, "that we had different ideas about what happy looked like." She wanted to talk about it. She had things to say, that I could have said something, that she hadn't meant for things to go the way they had, that she hadn't realized. I listened. I believed her, actually. I don't think she had sat down and decided to take advantage of me. I think it's possible to do that to someone without ever making a conscious choice, and I think that's almost more important to understand than the other version. But I also knew that if I stayed and had the conversation, I would stay. That's the kind of man I am. I would have accepted her explanation and gone back to my small room and found some new equilibrium. And 6 months later, I would have been standing at that kitchen counter again. So I listened, and then I said I thought the move was the right thing for both of us. I moved on a gray Saturday morning at the end of November. I didn't have much. Most of what I owned was still in storage. A friend of mine, Doug, had a truck and gave me 2 hours of his Saturday without asking anything in return. We had the room cleared by noon. I left my key on the kitchen counter. Nadia had taken Theo to her mother's for the morning. I don't know if that was planned or if she just couldn't be there for it. I didn't ask. I drove to Burlington with my car loaded with books and the few things I'd kept in my room. I signed the paperwork with the super, took the elevator up to the 6th floor, and stood in the empty apartment looking out at the lake. It was gray and a little choppy, November doing what November does. But I could see a long way. I didn't hear from Nadia for 4 days. Then, on a Wednesday, my phone started ringing, and it kept ringing. By the end of the following week, I had 28 missed calls, from Nadia, from Scott, and 2 from my sister, who I assume had been recruited to talk some sense into me. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was punishing anyone. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't sitting in my apartment enjoying the silence in some calculated way. I just needed a few days where my time was completely my own, where I woke up in the morning, and the day was nothing but my choices end to end, and I needed to experience that before I went back into the relationship and tried to renegotiate what it looked like. I eventually called Nadia back on a Sunday afternoon. We talked for a long time. It was a hard conversation, and also a better one than any we'd had in months, probably because we were finally having it from separate addresses. She said she missed me. I said I missed her too, and Theo especially. She asked if I thought we could find a new way to do this. I said I thought we could. I've been in Burlington for several months now. Alan came to visit in January, and we watched the Leafs lose graciously over 2 very good bottles of wine from the Okanagan. I have a library card, a favorite coffee shop near the water, and a Tuesday morning walking group I found through the Burlington Seniors Center, which I want to say is a much less depressing place than that description suggests. I see Theo on Sundays usually. I pick him up and we go somewhere, the museum, the park, once a really excellent dinosaur exhibit at the Royal Ontario Museum that he talked about for the next 3 weeks. He calls me Grandpa the way small children say things they completely mean without any distance in it at all. Nadia and I are finding our way back to each other. It's slower than I expected and also more honest. She has, to her credit, started saying things she should probably have said sooner. So have I. Scott is polite at Christmas dinner, and I am polite back. And for now, that's the version of this relationship that exists, and I think that's all right. Not everything has a better version yet. I think about June often. Not always in the way that hurts. Sometimes just in the ordinary way. The way you carry someone who has been part of the furniture of your life for so long that they're still there in the peripheral vision of every room you enter. I think she would have liked the apartment. She would have put plants on the balcony and had opinions about the curtains, and within a week, she would have known the names of everyone in the building. I found a new notebook, not to replace hers. I still have hers, and I'll open it eventually, when it's time. But I bought a plain one from the bookshop near the waterfront, and I've started writing in it. Restaurant names, mostly. Places I want to try. A few in Burlington, a few in Hamilton, one in Montreal that a woman in my walking group swore was worth the drive. I don't know exactly what the next chapter looks like, but I'm the one writing it now, and that turns out to make all the difference.